And I want to welcome you to a second program sponsored by the Muscarelle Museum of Art for our Native Artists in Residence Week this week. To begin, I'd like to have Matthew Solomon, the president of the American Indian Students Association, read our land acknowledgement. Matthew?
Thank you. William and Mary acknowledges the indigenous peoples who are the original inhabitants of the lands our campus is on today. The Cherenhaka Nottoway, Chickahominy, Eastern Chickahominy, Mattaponi, Monacan, Nansmond, Nottoway, Pamunkey, Patawomic, Upper Mattaponi, and Rappahannock tribes, and pay our respects to tribal members, past and present.
Thank you, Matthew. Thank you very much. Next, it's my pleasure to introduce the director of the Muscarelle Museum of Art, Mr. David Brashear, who will introduce our guest. David?
Thank you, Danielle. Good afternoon, everybody. Well, each semester, we take a bit of a deep dive into an aspect of the art world through our Muscarelle Explorations series, and this fall, we have focused on the voice of the artist. Our first speaker in the series was Roberto Hamora, the Richmond-based Filipino-American artist, who during his 2 weeks in residency created a print that will be unveiled in a virtual presentation on November 30th. And I hope you'll all be able to join us for that special event. Well, as some of you know, this week we are fortunate to be bringing two artists to campus to share their voices, Diego Romero and Cara Romero. And I want to thank the Muscarelle Museum of Art Foundation for making the Romero's visit possible and enabling us to provide this program enrichment to William and Mary's Native American Studies program and the Department of Anthropology, and then also thank those departments along with the American Indian Resource Center and the Negrado Sapner Endowment for Native Studies for also supporting the visit this week by our friends. Cara Romero spoke last night at the Sadler Center and told us her story of artistic exploration and the layered meaning in her works. She's an incredible photographer of enormous creativity, and we were so glad to hear from her last night. Today, we're fortunate to hear from her husband, Diego Romero, a third generation Cochiti Pueblo artist who works in pottery and printmaking. Diego attended the Institute of American Indian Arts in Santa Fe, and then later enrolled at the Otis Parsons School of Design in Los Angeles, where he earned his BFA. He next continued his artistic education at UCLA, where he was awarded an MFA. Diego's works intertwine social commentary with humor and present constructed stories that weave together traditional Cochiti symbols and patterns with pop culture. He often covers challenging spaces of Native identity and history, along with other important themes such as gender politics, environmentalism, and sexuality. His style connects contemporary art form to the ancient and traditional art form. Diego's work is compelling, it's informing, and it's often with a wink that compels one to dig more deeply. His work is highly acclaimed, included in museum collections around the world, and we're proud to have two of his works now in our collection at the Muscarelle. It's my great pleasure and honor today to welcome Diego Romero to the Muscarelle Museum and to William and Mary. Please join me in welcoming him.
Thank you. As he said, hello, good evening. I'm Diego. I'll be presenting tonight. I am born and raised in Berkeley, California, from biracial parents. I always think that's important to mention because it's from this perspective that the art is created. I learned my trade from a Hopi lady at the Institute of American Indian Art, and it's taken me on this marvelous journey, which brought me here tonight. So I'm just going to jump right in and say, this summer I was asked to do a paper on a piece that had influenced my life. And this particular pot and this moment came to mind when I had seen this crater at the Getty Museum in my youth. And I wrote the paper. It's called Foot Race. It's about athletes and I guess the human experience is how I'm going to start out. So with that in mind, here's a recent piece that I did this summer. As you can see, I've drawn from the original, but I've given it more of a pop twist, looking at artists such as Keith Haring, and I guess I want to say, throwing a little bit of Keith Haring in there, a little bit of Greek amphora. I've put it on a Pueblo shape. I did this over the summer. I was pleased with it. It came out pretty much how I had envisioned it. I just decided to go with the torso center cut, and it just had a kind of aesthetic flow to it. Usually with pots, I kind of view pots as a little different from bowls in that pots have a circular narrative, where with a bowl, it might be, as you will see, it's more of a one-piece image narrative. This piece was Reclining Dinosaur. It's pretty old. This actually goes back to the early 90s. I was kind of doing environmental commentary on this. So I kind of like to do these landscapes. I find them like mile markers in time. The landscape really reflects, for me, the here and now of where we are in as humans in our existence. So I do a lot of landscapes. Usually they're environmental. At this particular time, I remember I was making my bowls kind of crooked for some reason. I liked that aspect of it. That's on purpose. So I was always giving them a little extra twist or a nudge there just to bend them, because that was the aesthetic of that period of the work. How that happened. I like clay because it's from the earth. How does that happen? Okay.
Did you want to play that?
You could do that. Go ahead.
I don't know if I'll be able to. Okay. Sorry.
Okay. So here again, we're dealing with, I guess at this point I was talking about consumerism and American society, and how we were this society of mass consumption, and how we were kind of like that scene in Ebenezer Scrooge where the ghost comes back and says, "You're weaving this chain and it's your karma." And I was like, well, we as a society, we're building this pyramid of hamburgers, right, of 99-cent Big Macs, and this is our karma, and we're going to have to pay for this at some point further down the line. So again, this was part of all what was going through my head back in the 90s. Also, I guess, at that point, I was fresh out of grad school, and I was surviving on 99-cent hamburgers, literally. This piece was titled Day of the Earth Pigs, and I was going again through my little critique of the SUV. And I remember being in my friend's studio one day and looking out the window, and all you could see going up and down the highway was literally one SUV after another. And I remember looking out the window and I counted 20 of them just within the span of a minute. I was like, wow, where are all these SUVs coming from? Where do they go? And so anyway, that was the kind of incentive for this piece, was the SUV. And I think I borrowed the clouds from Toy Story. Toy Story was a popular movie at that time, and I liked the way the Toy Story clouds looked. This was a landscape on the way to Oklahoma, outside of Amarillo, Texas. There's the Cadillac Ranch. And I was living in Oklahoma, and I would drive back and forth across the highway, and I would always see this landscape. And it's for some reason, it just became like this recurrent theme of my life, like this mile marker again of place and time. And I remember I would get out oftentimes and go walk around the back in those days, you could actually walk around the Cadillac Ranch and climb on top of the Cadillacs and jump from one Cadillac to the next. And anyway, it just kind of always was this place and this time that stuck out in my head. And I think I was inspired by this artist. I was like, it was kind of a homage to his piece. I was profoundly moved by it, and it seemed very much in the vein of what I was doing, but of course he was doing it on a much grander scale. But anyway, usually things that I observe or affect me kind of translate their way into the work at some point. That's kind of how I digest and observe the world around me, is through the art. And here again, we have the dinosaur bones on the bottom, kind of again to signify that we as people are just part of a continuation of existence on this planet, that there is stuff before us and there will be stuff after us. This is the reverse side of the SUV pot, and that's literally the actual landscape that existed outside my friend's studio. So that was, like I said, the inspiration for that piece came out of that. This was a Santa Fe landscape, and I remember, so one of the things I always like to do again is put the remains of the previous culture or society below the street level, or these cutaway views of the earth. In this one, I kind of threw a couple beer bottles and beer cans in there amongst the pots and the skeletal remains of the Indians, I guess I want to say. This is a bowl similar to the other. Lots of times I'll work in a series, or I'll go through these thoughts and I'll do more than one piece related to a certain particular idea, and I'll work through, and oftentimes I'll say, oh, that's interesting, I'll borrow from this, take from that, and kind of figure it all out as I go along. So I think this actually came first before the actual bowl. Santa Fe landscape again. This building, for some reason, on the far side with the bricks, always seemed to fascinate me. This was a building outside of my studio, and it was, old brick building with the satellite dish on there. And like I said, for some reason, this particular building was always of interest to me, always seemed to fascinate me. So it showed up in a pot. This piece was titled American Dream, and it was done right after grad school. Again, like I said, I was living off 99-cent hamburgers at the time, and it just seemed that there was this like dream of that land of the Big Mac, right? That someday I would achieve something greater than all this. That there was. This is the reverse side of the same pot, or the far side of it. And as I mentioned, I guess mostly this pot had the SUV, which I was doing a lot of SUV art at the time, but it also had this particular building that I always found interesting for whatever reason. So here again, we got the same thing as the hamburgers going on, consumerism, disposable culture, but this time instead of little people stacking Big Macs, it's giants stacking SUVs. So, and this all plays into like this Indian mythology of little people and giants that once roamed the earth before we as people emerge and populate the planet. There's kind of like a mythology or this kind of past of these people were once here and now they're gone, and now we're here, but someday we'll be gone. And what do we leave behind? This pile of SUVs or this pile of Big Macs. This is, again, kind of playing into the whole mythology. Coyote shows up. He's a character prominent in our lore, I guess. There's always coyote stories. So this is Coyote and Hound, kind of out there doing their thing under the stars. I've borrowed a little bit from Keith Haring. That's where I started this foreshortening of the foreground background. Not a little bit. I've borrowed a lot from Keith Haring. All right. So Keith Haring is a major influence. Looked at his work, always loved it, still do. He's been a big influence. That's where I got the little beads going, foreground, background foreshortening. I've looked at the skyline is taken from an artist called Jack Kirby. He used to draw Fantastic Four for Marvel Comics. And this particular kind of skyscape is called the Kirby Crackle. And it's just done by putting dots together in this, and it kind of, if you put enough dots together, it kind of piles into this kind of Milky Way effect, right? And big dots, little dots, and it's a pretty good way to fill a lot of space. You'll see all throughout the body, and later I use a lot of it. It's one of my favorite go-tos. Dancing coyotes, same thing, got the foreshortening, skyline, mythology going on. One of my favorite things to do in art is alter the landscape, right? So I was watching this PBS on Easter Island, and I was like, oh, isn't that fascinating? These guys made these giant heads out here on Easter Island. Wouldn't that be funny if we had some of that out in the Southwest? So it's kind of this little, again, homage to the Easter Island heads, but they're giant Mimbres heads. We got factory landscape again. I do, like I had mentioned earlier, the landscape and the factories and the environment are all very much, I view them as mile markers in time, reflective of where we are in space and time and on this planet and our relation to the environment around us. This piece was an alien abduction piece. I've always been fascinated by outer space and aliens and Star Trek and chariots of the gods, and this was just kind of done all in fun. New Mexico has this contemporary mythology that surrounds Roswell, right? That there was a spaceship that crashed in southern New Mexico, and that somehow these remains are kept in a big storage locker out in Amarillo or something, and we got all this microwave and cell phone technology from all these alien. Anyway, it's all part of the contemporary mythology, I think, of New Mexico. And so with that in mind, I kind of playfully incorporate it into the narrative. This was an old VW wreck that was in back of the house one summer. I have 3 kids, and they would come and stay with me in the summer. These were nice summers. They were all young. They all came out. We would come back from UCLA over the summer. I would bring my 3 kids back from California with me. We would all live in New Mexico at my parents' house, and my kids and I would all participate in our tribal yearly dance once a year we do this, we call it Cochiti Feast, where we all do our traditional dance, and my kids were all part of this, and they would all come and live with me, and they would play on this wrecked VW rusted old shell that was in the arroyo. And I remember that summer the oldest boy had to leave a little early, so he sold the VW to my oldest daughter, and we wrote this little pink slip up and pretended that it was her car after that. So anyway, it was a fond memory and reflective of where I was at the time and the landscape I was living. It was a happy summer that year. Those were good times. Underneath the mountain in Santa Fe in my parents' garage with my 3 kids. This was another aspect of it. I also felt like Sisyphus, that every day I would have to roll this boulder up the hill, and every day it would crush me. This is actually not that summer. This was a different summer and different kids. I have I've raised several kids throughout my life, and so this was a different batch of kids, but nonetheless, they're all good people. They're all adults, but this particular summer, it just felt like this never-ending boulder that I would roll up the hill every night. And like Sisyphus, it would roll me back over and crush me, and I would have to start the next day by rolling the boulder back up the hill. But so I'm not only using like Greek imagery, but I also draw on the mythological aspect of the narrative as well. I've always been a fan of mythology, and as far as I can remember, I was always enthralled by the Iliad and the Odyssey and Hector and Achilles and all these Viking tales of Beowulf and Roman tales about Romulus and Remus, and anyway, the list goes on. But I've always been a fan of the hero and the superhero, which I think later played into my love for comic books. On a more serious side, this was done after 9/11, and I remember I was in the studio, and I was watching this CNN film footage of this Afghanistan man, and he was pulling his infant child out of the rubble. And it just seemed like this really poignant moment where the book in the studio was open to Guernica, Picasso's Guernica. It just by chance happened to be on the table and flipped to this page. So I kind of, it seemed like it was just meant to be, and the ideas came together. So we have the infant child clutching at his mother's breast under a cascade, hail of rockets that are descending on her, which are coming out of the smoke trails are coming out of the 9/11 Twin Towers. And I remember watching this unfold on TV, and the images of the people leaping from the building while they were on fire really just seared itself into my brain. And I guess like I had mentioned, I always digest this stuff and work through it through the art. So inevitably, it found its way into the narrative and on a pot. So we have the Twin Towers going down, the people leaping from the buildings on fire, and then we have this, if you look to the far side, you'll see these rocket trails that are coming out of it, which again end up being the cascade of rockets that are falling on the mother and child. There's also 2 more sides to this pot. Regretfully, I don't have pictures of them, but one is a fallen Marine. That's a chess piece, as in the original. And my oldest son at this point, he had joined the Marines. after this, and he was really, Dad, we're going to go back and show them, and I'm going to join the Marines, and Grandpa was a Marine, and we're going to do this. And anyway, so oldest boy went off and joined the Marines, and that didn't turn out so well. This was on a lighter side. This was a Santa Fe landscape. I thought it was interesting because this teepee had gone up in front of the house, and there was these kind of, I want to say hippies that showed up in a van one day and put this teepee up. And it for some reason, it just, here again, we got the same brick building. It's watered down. So this building was in back of the house, the studio. And as I had said, there was this one summer where this hippie van showed up, and they unpacked and pitched this teepee up. And it just became, again, a point of interest. I was like, that's interesting that they're putting this teepee up. I think I'll go ahead and just throw that in the bowl. This again was during the 9/11 period. There was a lot of car bombings going on. It's interesting to me that some of this stuff was made probably like 20 years ago, but it's still very relevant today to the current situation. This was my own struggles with alcoholism, and my efforts to disengage from my addictions. And I'm a recovering alcoholic. It's part of who I am. It's been a struggle. It's less of a struggle now than it was, but nevertheless, it's part of who I am and part of the art. It's done from this perspective, and it, again, like I said, it finds its way into the narrative. It's a way of me working through my own issues, my own what's going on in my head at the time. So during this period, I was trying to quit drinking, but I couldn't. And no matter how hard I tried, it was like that movie with Robert De Niro, where he goes, it just keeps pulling me back in. And I just couldn't seem to get out of this cycle of alcoholism. But I did eventually. Not this time, though, but it took a little longer than that. This piece was done, this is fairly recent. And here again, we got the Kirby crackle in the background. By this time, I've really kind of perfected it and taken the elements of it that I liked and kind of made it my own at this point. I've really put a lot more quasars and explosions. And I always thought if you were Superman and had supervision, and if you looked into the night sky, and you would actually see the universe unfolding, because you know how the light from the universe is old and it goes back, and that if you had this superhuman sight, you would actually look and see the dawn of the Big Bang, right? The beginnings of the expansion of the universe, and that this is kind of what you would see. The universe popping and flaring up, and cracks of light and energy, balls of energy. And so within that, we have these four anthropomorphized characters. And this piece was titled In the Beginning. And I remember at this particular time, I was kind of, I was creating my own mythology, my own stories, and I was combining creationism with Darwinism to make up these little anecdotes. And people just assumed that because I was Native American that they were true. And I was like, no. I'm just making this stuff up as I go along. And this particular tale goes back, like I said, to the beginning. And I always like to use my friend Bob Grass's voice here when I give this narrative. He goes, no, in the beginning, the Creator, He made all the stars and all the universe. And He created all the creatures in the universe, and He gave them all a great tail. All the creatures of the universe had these tails, but He gave man the greatest tail of all. But the other animals in the universe were jealous, and they went to the Creator and said, we have a problem with this man. He has no humility. He flaunts his tail in the market, and he waves it around us, and he makes us all jealous. And then the Creator said, no, I have watched this man, and you are right. He has no humility whatsoever. And what we will do is we will teach him humility. We will have this big banquet tonight, this big celebration. And when he gets drunk and he passes out, and all of you will get together and we will take his tail from him. So they have this big party, and it goes as planned, and man passes out on the couch, I guess, or whatever, and they all get together and they clip his tail from him. But this has the opposite effect, because when he wakes up the next morning, he realizes he's the only creature without a tail, and he figures that he's unique and superior to all the creatures in the universe. And people would say, oh, that's a marvelous story, Diego. Is that from Cochiti? And I say, no. That's just... So I went through this phase. I was actually amusing myself, because people would just assume that because I was Native American, that all these tales must have like a historical base. Or so I would just come up with these little outrageous anecdotes one after another, and they would eventually find their way into pots. And this one was probably the most successful of all of them. This piece was done not shortly. This piece was done after my divorce. And it was traumatic. I don't recommend it to anybody. But if you find yourself in those circumstances, there is a beginning and an end to it. And this morning, after probably 9 months of just utter depression and moping around in my self-pity and just drowning, couldn't look myself in the mirror, I woke up one morning and I was able to leap tall buildings in a single bound. And it was done. I knew it was behind me. I was ready to move on. This is Saint Sebastian. And throughout the body of work, I'm fascinated by martyrs. I don't know exactly what it is that fascinates me about the martyr, but there's something going on there where I'm like, oh, that's fascinating. You mean he's a martyr? And they'll say, yeah, he's a martyr. And I'll say, that's a fascinating story. So this is Saint Sebastian. He was martyred by the Romans, and I've given it a kind of Pueblo Indian twist. So I've changed him from Saint Sebastian to a native. And I remember I was looking at a lot of Frank Miller comic books at the time, and I really liked the gore and the blood splatter, and I wanted to do it as grisly as possible. I wanted to make it look as like this guy had really just been in a lot of pain and suffering before he finally checked out. So I just really went at it with, I want some blood, I want some scraped knees, I want not just one arrow, but a dozen. And anyway, that's what came out of this martyrdom kind of piece. This was done after my third son was born from my beloved wife, Cara Romero, who sits in the audience today. Everything had a happy ending, and I was so blessed to have a baby with Cara, and we named him Paris after the Prince of Troy from the Iliad. So this would be his namesake piece, I suppose. And so yeah, it's just a little doodle of Paris of Troy, a little bit of Keith Haring in there, a little bit of Frank Miller, some of my favorite artists that have always influenced me, and a little bit of mythology, right? All kind of. This was done short. This was done right after me and Cara had that first real fight in our marriage, where I said some things that I could never take back. And there's always that moment where you marry the person and you have this first really bad fight, and you realize this person is not the person I thought I married. So this piece was kind of done shortly after that, and they're getting married. She's dressed in her traditional. I put Kara in a Pueblo woman garb, and they're one of the spectators is viewing it, saying, "Great corn mother, Povey still doesn't realize she's marrying a monster." And of course, that would be my alter ego, the wolf man there in the tuxedo. And as I said, it's all everything that I'm experiencing or I'm trying to digest or work through usually makes its way into the narrative. I draw, and I like to draw every day. And so I'll have lots of drawings. Not everyone makes it to a pot, but the ones that I love or feel that are noteworthy or pot-worthy will eventually find their way into the pottery. This piece was called Fallen Angel, and it was part of a triptych in which the wings are forcibly removed on the next one, and then the angel falls. And it had to do more with my own alcoholism and addiction rather than Christianity and the fall of the angel. But anyway, this piece is called Fallen Angel. Not everything, throughout the years, I don't have slides of everything. I regret it, but some stuff slips through the floorboards. But that's what was going on here. We have the pre-fallen angel. He's about to fall, I guess. We got the landscape again. It's kind of just northern New Mexico. Got the cut side of the underside view of the earthscape and the bonfire going on, and I had this little yappy dog at this time. That was my dog Lily. She was this little barky schnauzer. This piece is titled Narcissist, and if you ever so Narcissist comes to the river. This is a Greek mythology, and he falls in love with himself at the river's bank, and stays there and stares at himself, and eventually dies of lack of food and water. And henceforth, that's where the term narcissist comes from. So this was all, again, I remember someone had questioned me. I think someone referred to me as a narcissist. They were like, "Oh, Diego, you're such a narcissist." And I was like, "But am I really, though?" So I had to think about this, and I gave it a lot of thought, actually, and I came to the conclusion that while I had narcissistic tendencies, I was not truly a narcissist. So anyway, this bowl came out of that, and so I found it amusing, and this would be my narcissistic tendency coming out. I was like, "Oh, how clever. You've put the feet on the top and the view of the man on the bottom." And that's actually how it looks when you stand by the river, right? Your feet are cut off. I just patted myself on the back for that. I thought, "Oh, you're so clever, Mr. Romero." Santa Fe landscape. This was, again, lots of this stuff is formula, but I think it's important to put it all in there. It's how I make my living, right? So we got the junked out car, the Kirby crackle on the landscape. We got the burn can from northern New Mexico. Lots of times in northern New Mexico, we'll burn our own trash. If you're, off the grid, so to speak, then there's no dump trucks. People will have these burn cans. And anyway, so we got my dog Lily. the trailer house and the people out kind of just, he's playing the guitar, right? Amongst the ruins or the remains of their ancestors, you know, underneath this kind of glorious sky, night sky. As I mentioned, I do prints. I really don't consider myself a printmaker as much as a graphic designer. So this was kind of interesting in that I had always wanted to draw comic books, and when I set out on this journey, I had set out to be an illustrator, but somewhere along the line at IAIA, I took this left turn and I became a potter. And pottery became the passion. Well, after doing all this pottery, people that ran independent presses started to come to me and say, you know, those are really interesting images you have on your pots. Would you come down to the shop and pull an edition with us? So I said, yeah, of course, that sounds fascinating. So with that in mind, I kind of embarked as a designer of plates, and I've done several editions at this point, and it's become a mainstay, and people always say, Diego Romero, potter, printer. I'm not really a printer. I don't actually, you know, printing is something that people go to school for and learn, and it's a very, it's a craft and a skill. So I want to be clear about that I'm more of a graphic designer, which is actually, ironically enough, which is what I wanted to be all along in the very beginning of this journey. I wanted to do graphic design, draw, make comics, right? So this piece was titled Don't Shoot, Diego. And again, you know, playing back to my narcissistic tendencies, I threw my own name in there. I've always found that ironic that I'm named after this conquistador, Don Diego de Vargas, that showed up in the Southwest and just did horrible atrocities to the native people. You know, he chopped their feet off and just, you know, engaged in the act of just colonialization, you know, rape, murder, all these barbaric things, and yet I'm named after him. So I've always found some kind of irony in that. So we have here, don't shoot Diego. He goes, they're enemies of the church, and this is war. Translated from Spanish, because they would be speaking Spanish, right? I mean, so anyway, that's where this is coming from. This was based on just the Pueblo Revolt and again the history of the peoples of the Southwest and our relationship to colonization, the church, the crown, all this stuff that is in our history. But oddly enough, it's a little known history, right? You don't, most history books you'll pick up and it'll start with, I guess Williamsburg and the colonies and George Washington and the Delaware, and it moves into Abraham Lincoln and the Civil War. And anyway, so I was more curious, like what was our history of the Southwest? And it is there. If you look at it and research it, you can find it. But you have to kind of go off the beaten path. It's not it wasn't taught in schools. Let's just say that I wasn't learning this stuff in public school or college. This is our old friend Uma Thurman here, and she's dressed as in traditional Pueblo attire. And this is one of my favorite formulas, and I call it Pueblo appropriation, Pueblofication. And what I do is I'll take a popular, iconic image of pop culture, and I'll go back in and I'll indigenize it, right? I'll make it native somehow. And people love this stuff, right? It pays the bills. People are like, I gotta have that. I loved that movie. I love Uma Thurman. I read that book, Cochiti, right? So anyway, it's a part of the formula. And I guess it's a very important part of the formula is what I'm saying, is that people identify with pop, culture, narrative. It's all what sells art. So, and then she made it into a bowl, right? I remember I was kind of late on the rent this month, and I had to move quick on my feet, and I was like, well, I'll just chop one of these prints up and drop Uma into the bowl and paint her pretty colors. And so anyway, I'm very much a realist about this. You know, I'm a studio artist. I've made my living at this for 30 years now. There were sometimes I have to move quick on my feet, less so now. My life's much more stable now. But sometimes I would be like, oh man, rent's due, you know, child support's due. This is, you know, what am I gonna do? What am I gonna do? You know, I said, okay, I'll go back to the stacks and find something and throw it in a bowl real quick and paint it, bake it, and sell it. And anyway, that's how I make my living. This was Pueblo Revolt. Again, the priests at Hopi were hurled from the cliffs. And this was very much done in the heroic comic style of, I guess, Marvel Comics, DC. But anyway, it was historic meets kind of comic style with the resistance, the historical narrative of the Pueblo Indian in the face of Christianity. So after the Pueblo Revolt, there was, the priests were actually tossed off the cliff, the mesas at Hopi. This is the old landscape again, revisited. This time, I've put a factory in the back, and we'll talk about this in a more. There's this piece I worked through, and I'll address it later in another piece that I feel embodies it better. But here again, we have the old junked car, the trailer houses, the reservation landscape, and the factory in the back. So this all led to a term that my wife had exposed me to called environmental racism. And at the time I was like, that's right, that's so unfair. And for those of you that aren't familiar with the term, environmental racism is when your community has no voice or no legal representation or no money to hire a lawyer. So big industry will build and dump their waste in your backyard. And unfortunately, this happens to, and I suppose at the end of the day, it just doesn't happen to be a native problem. This could be any community. If you're, living in Appalachia, or whether, I'm not familiar with all the landscapes of America, but certainly in the Southwest, on the Navajo Reservation, outside on Indian land, you get a lot of this. You get polluting of streams, you get polluting of, all this stuff goes into the watershed, and people suffer. So anyway, my wife had educated me to all this, and I was like, wow, that's so unfair. I'm going to do a piece about this. And so we got the landscape, but this time it has the factory in the background. I had mentioned earlier that we have this feast day, right? So these are feast day dancers, and they're all dressed traditional. And this actually happened. This was one feast day. We were all out there. And when you come into the Pueblo, there's a big sign that says positively no picture taking, recording, sketching, or drawing. And so that's part of it, right? They're very strict. But this girl, during the lunch break, we were all standing out there, and she pulled the cell phone out from her belt and took the selfie. And I remember there was some people that stepped into it, and you could tell they were like, yeah, I want to be in your selfie, and there were other people like, no. So it kind of brought up this interesting question of what's appropriate and what's not appropriate from within the culture, right? Clearly, we have these rules that apply to the outside culture that you're not allowed to come in and take our picture, But what about if you're from within the culture? Are you allowed to take the picture? And anyway, it just brought this interesting question up. And they're all kind of, they all have separate kind of looks on their face. They're all kind of debating this. Some are with it, some aren't. And usually most natives will say, no, no, no. Whether you're Indian or not, the rules are the rules for everybody. But some people don't feel that way. And anyway, so that this came out of this one moment, and it just kind of struck me. We were all out there. She pulls out the phone, takes the selfie. And I would be probably from the viewer's perspective right here. It was done right in front of half of us. Achilles. Achilles is one of the heroes from Troy. He's struck in the ankle by an arrow from Paris, and he dies at Troy. I did this piece around this period. My aunt had died, and me and my brother were going to visit my aunt. She was on her deathbed. It was right before as she was dying, and this particular aunt had never liked me or my brother, and had made it very clear from all along that we really weren't her favorite nephew or niece, and for whatever reasons. I mean, I guess I knew what the reasons were, but so we were driving out there, and me and my brother were conversing about it, and my brother said, well, you know the story of the Iliad. He says, after Achilles is killed, they have a competition for his armor. And Ulysses and Ajax have to compete for the armor, and Ulysses wins. And but as a part of it, he has to do the memorial for Ajax, I think it goes. Anyway, he says, it is true that in life we were never friends, but and we were fierce competitors, but in death all is forgiven. And that just struck me. So I was like, that's right, Mateo. In death all is forgiven. So that's where this came out of. The piece followed up with that. And in death all is forgiven. This is the environmental landscape again. These little boys were out there playing football one afternoon. Just kind of struck me that they were going about their daily, they were just existing as little boys, and doing what little boys do, right? Play catch. But they were doing it in the shadow of big industry. Got to be optimistic, right? Two sides to every coin. This is a landscape outside of Southern California, outside of Los Angeles. It's a wind farm, and I remember this piece was kind of done as the opposite to the previous piece, and this piece was titled A Bright New Day. And we got the wind energy and the scaled down electric car, and it was kind of again, everything can't be just negative, right? You gotta have some optimism in there. So it was this kind of optimistic view of the future. We'll see. Here's our old friend, the Mutant Ninja Turtles, right? But done in Pueblo Indian fashion, right? I've taken the Leonardo, Donatello, Michelangelo, and made them all kind of American Indianized, right? They're all kind of Pueblo turtles, so to speak. So anyway, that was fun. This piece is titled Girl in the Anthropocene. And this was actually probably my favorite of all the pieces that we've discussed earlier about environmental racism, about living and existing in the shadow of big industry, and about how these two individuals are going through their daily affairs in life, the mundane, but they do it in the shadow of big industry. She's very pregnant. She's 9 months pregnant, and one affects the other. The two, right? The factories will eventually affect her unborn child. So that's was kind of the conclusion of, or my favorite of all that series. Lots of times, as I mentioned earlier, I'll work in a series and I'll do several pots around a particular, I'll get into a theme type mode, and I'll do several pieces with a similar narrative. This piece was in response to the canonization of Juniper Sierra, and he was recently canonized, and this outraged a lot of the Native community because he had just been simply brutal to the Native population of the Southwest. So I made this piece in response to that, and I made a print. The people that I printed were like, we like that piece, can we do a print off of that? So we did the print, and oddly enough, the print wound up at the Theological Institute. Someone was telling me later, they go, yeah, I saw your print at the Theological Institute. And I said, really? And he said, yes. Oh, he said, they loved it. He said, it's there at the 7th station of the cross. He goes, and they use it to educate the priests about you can't be overzealous in proselytizing with the natives. And I said, really? And he said, yeah, they interpreted it as a native Jesus. I said, really? Anyway, it just goes to show you, right? Beauty is in the eyes of the beholder, and we all bring what we bring to art. That's why it's so great, right? We all bring our own perspective, our own narrative to it, and we take from it what we want. And I just thought it was all very interesting that's where this image wound up when it was all said and done. This piece was done for the LA County Museum, and at the time it was early on during the Trump presidency, and he was having this back and forth every day with Kim Jong-Jim and they were arguing. He was calling him Rocket Man and this, and he was shooting a lot of missiles off, and I remember the LA Museum had said, we want a piece, but we want it to be political and about the times, current event. And they said, can you? And I said, well, what about this? I said, I always liked this movie, Dr. Strangeglove. I said, where the guy rides the bomb, and the final scene of the movie rides down, comes out of the airplane on the atomic bomb. And they said, we love it, so I went ahead, but I changed it to a interballistic missile. And I was again, I liked certain elements of this. I like certain things like missile trails, right? Night skies. It all came together. So I did this piece, and it's in the LA County, and they were very pleased with it. They told me just the other day they had put it out on display. And again, I did it maybe 4 or 5 years ago, but it seems to be just as relevant today as it was the day I made it. This is my daughter, our daughter, Cricket. She is a traditional dancer. Again, this is the style of regalia we wear in the Southwest. She's done this dance ever since she was 5 years old. So this was a collaboration piece with one of my heroes, Jody Falwell. And Jody, when I was a young and beginning potter, starting on my journey, I saw one of Jody's pots in the Southwest Museum, and it was contemporary. Up to this point, I had only thought traditional. I want to be a traditional potter. And then one day I went into the museum and I saw a pot by Jody Falwell, and it was very contemporary, and everything made sense to me. I was like, I don't want to be a traditional potter. That's actually not who I am. I'm not a traditional person. I want to be a contemporary potter. So with that in mind, I became a contemporary potter. But Jody had always stuck out in my head, and she was my hero. Well, go figure, years later, me and Jody are now close friends. And she and her have collaborated, me and her have collaborated on several pieces. This one was not too long ago. This was fairly recent. We're working on a piece right now. And Jody brought me this pot, and we discussed the narrative. And I remember telling Jody, I said, we ought to do the Indians hanging upside down from rafters. And Jody said, absolutely not. She says, we're gonna do something. She said, we're gonna start a piece, and we're gonna start with Cricket as a young girl, and we're gonna do the journey of her life through adolescence and into womanhood. And Cricket's a ballerina. So she dances ballet. She's on point. She has her point shoes here, and she's also a young woman. This was based on photographs Kara took lots of times. So this was a collaborative piece, not only with me and Jody, but me and my wife as well. Kara took these photos, and we all collaborated, and we came up with this pot. I think it's interesting, because it's not something I would have came to on my own or done on my own, but yet it does speak very much. It looks like a Diego Romero and a Jody Falwell and a Kara Romero piece. It's all very, very anyway. So this gourd vessel, I was in the studio one night. I was watching this special by Neil deGrasse Tyson, and he was talking about wormholes and the universe and the beginning of the expansion of the universe, and how there was these incredible holes in the universe called wormholes, and you would go through one and you would come out in another time and place. And I thought, oh, that's interesting. And I was like, I think I'm going to go ahead and put that on the pot. So here we have my little character, which is a kind of a figure for man, allegory for and he's going through the wormhole, and he's coming out in another time. This piece was done, it was for the Museum of Indian Arts and Culture. And I drew heavily on a cover of one of my favorite childhood comic books called Commandy. And on it, Commandy was swimming past the Statue of Liberty on a raft, which my favorite artist, Jack Kirby, had said he had got from Planet of the Apes. In the final scene when the guy's waving his fists at the Statue of Liberty. So it all kind of came together, and it was about climate change. And this is Museum Hill on Santa Fe, which is on one of the higher peaks in Santa Fe. And there's this giant sculpture out there by Craig Goyasin. And the sculpture is supposed to be crumbling and falling apart. And Museum Hill is supposed to be underwater, which would mean the water level is pretty high at this point. And here we have my little character Chungo paddling by on a raft. He's the last boy. Coyote descending from the heavens with fire. This is part of our mythology. Coyote brings fire to man. But I wanted to do this piece where Coyote was like a rock star, right? Coming out of the heavens, bringing fire, bringing enlightenment to man. And I thought it would be fun to throw the cell phones in there, just to kind of give it a little more of a twist, right? Backside of the pot. This is Thus Spoke Popeye. Popeye is the leader of the Pueblo Revolt. This was a pivotal moment in the history of our people, where we stood up to the colonizers and dispelled the Spanish from the territory which would later become New Mexico. So he's a hero of our people. I wanted to do him very much like a superhero, standing in defiance to the colonizers. The Greeks, again, always fascinated by Hector and Achilles. This is Santiago. He's a saint. Santiago de Morada, killer of the Moors. And it was interesting that he's protector. He protects the trail of Christians on their pilgrimage to a church in Spain. I think he's associated with a character called, or referred to as El Cid. Nevertheless, he's very popular in New Mexico amongst the old school, I guess, Spanish Catholic Church. The Pueblos honor him as well. There's some irony to it. Lots of times during our dances, he'll show up. They'll have a little figure on a black horse that'll come out and ride around with a saber. And that's Santiago de Morada. So this was interesting. I did the piece, and it was actually a Catholic priest that bought this. And when he did buy it, I was explaining the history to him, and he said, "Oh, I know the history." He said, "I'm actually from the order of Santiago de Morada." He said, "I'm very familiar with the history." So he bought the piece, and he was of this, I guess, obscure, esoteric kind of religious sect. So I drew from the iconography of the actual, he shows up a lot. If you Google him, you'll see there's lots of paintings of him. And there's always like body parts strewn all over the place, and he's trampling the infidels. And in this case, it happens to be the Pueblo Indians. That was the same piece I showed you previously, front and back. I guess just to give you an idea of how something like that kind of works. I like these gourd shapes. This was, this was drawn from the previous piece, which came part of that, which I was in the studio one night watching Planet of the Apes, and that was the final scene, right, where he yells at the Statue of Liberty, and I'm all, that works. I'd like to try that sometime. Showed you that. This is the final piece. I did this just recently for the IAI Museum, and I revisited the old scene that I showed you earlier, which was probably about, over a decade ago I made the previous one, but this time I figured I would try it from a different perspective. This went to the museum at the Institute of American Indian Arts. They actually wanted something of this nature. They said, the pot you did of them throwing the priest off the cliff? I go, yeah, I do know that pot. They said, can you do us one like that? And I said, with a burning church? And they go, oh yes, with a burning church. So anyway, that's it. So thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Diego. We have time for a couple of questions, so if there are any questions in the audience, I'll bring the microphone over and allow you to speak.
Hi there. Thank you so much for that talk. That was incredibly interesting. I have a question about your approach to making art. So do you sort of sit there and visualize what you want to create and then put all your efforts towards, making that something tangible, or do you draw something, interpret that, and then go from there? Is it a very fluid process?
Yes, and it's all of that, actually. It is a very fluid process. It's a little bit of everything. I usually, like I said, I'll get in a groove, and something will be of interest to me at that time. Whether it's the Pueblo Revolt, or whether it's ballistic missiles, or whether it's whatever catches my interest at that time, I'll start to draw, and out of that I'll do a series of drawings, and out of that maybe one or two of those drawings will actually become actual ceramic pieces. And then out of those ceramic pieces, maybe one or two of those will become prints that someone will say, oh, I like that image, can we do an edition of that? And so that's how it works. I guess that would be the easiest one.
Any other questions? Okay, Diego, I have one final question for you, and that is, you're on a journey. What is in the crosshairs right now? What potentially is coming next in terms of theme?
I was always enthralled by this book called Chariots of the Gods by, I think, Kurt Vonnegut as a child. And in it, He says the Mayans went to outer space and they're going to come back in 2012. And I remember seeing this movie at the UC Berkeley as a kid, and I remember I walked out and I was like, I know where I'm going to be in 2012. I'm going to be on the roof of my house waiting for the Mayans to return. But it never happened. But anyway, this idea of Mayan astronauts seemed to be stuck in my head and has been for quite some time. And so I got a commission from the Lucas Museum. And he said, make it space. He said, I want something to do with outer space, right? It's the Lucas, Star Wars, it's that guy. So I was like, I got this perfect idea. Why don't we do these Mayan astronauts floating around like in the Lost in Space trailer, and anyway, so that's what I'm working on right now is a bunch of Mayan astronauts, and they're all kind of flowing out of the Jupiter 2 on this zip line and floating around this pod. So it's...
Excellent. Well, I hope you all join me in thanking Diego for sharing his artistic journey with us today.